You know me because of the betrayal of my covert CIA identity. That happened in July 2003. Of course, last month was the 10-year anniversary of the Iraq War. So my husband, Joe, and I have, it's given us a lot to reflect upon, both in our, what we've gone through personally, as well as what the country has experienced over the last decade. And it was really a moment to stop and go, what are the lessons learned, and what does it mean to us today? And when I speak to, like I will this morning, the university students, it's hard to believe. I mean, they were just in middle school, maybe, when the shock and awe and the invasion of Iraq began. So let me just open with that. It's much more fun to have let's just have a conversation.
I'm a Vietnam veteran and served in the Navy. Sorry to jump in right away, and I look back on it, this was, Saigon will have fallen 1975, I believe, and that's a momentous time for us as Vietnam veterans. I was a fleet sailor, but we were off the coast, and I look back and I think, we still have casualties with the suicides and the results from the Agent Orange. And my question is, I knew people who, we had a guy from Platteville who was killed Christmas Eve of 2003 in Iraq, left a family. I got to know his wife and his family in Dubuque through soccer, of all things. And, the end of the Iraq War, I reflected on that too. And how do you reflect on something like that?
Well, thank you for your service. My brother was a Marine in Vietnam. He was wounded during the Tet Offensive. So I think that as we begin to see the profound effect, on one hand, because battlefield medicine is so much better and so many people are coming back alive, and yet they're deeply damaged. Sometimes you can see it overtly, sometimes not. And as we hear more and more and understand more and more about PTSD and the unbelievable rate of suicide with either among actively serving or just recently discharged servicemen and women is astounding. And I know recently there's been quite a bit of coverage, thank goodness, of the VA and how they are sorely behind in the sort of services, mental and physical, that we promised. We said, okay, you're prepared to give the ultimate sacrifice to our nation. We promise we will give you lifelong medical care. And where you hear that when they apply for claims, the benefits that are due to them, it is taking, what's the average, 560 days? Something.
Over a year.
Over a year. It's outrageous. And this is true. This is a man-made problem. This is really a bureaucracy problem. Shinseki is the head of the VA. My husband and I have met him, and we admire him, and yet it's obviously the problem is vast. I mean, he's trying to fix it, but have you ever seen those pictures of like the paperwork, the files that are piled up? It's like in a warehouse. So that's one thing, but we would be remiss if we only thought about it through the American filter. I mean, there's over 150,000 Iraqi civilians that have been killed or displaced, maimed. The hubris that the administration had at that time, and what we were told and sold as the American public of why we needed to go to war, why the threat was imminent, that we want to be careful that the smoking gun is not in the shape of the mushroom cloud, the sort of thing, that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, and this was a preemptive war to keep us safe, proved to be built on, to be euphemistic, the intelligence was cherry-picked and it was manipulated, and it really was to advance a particular ideological viewpoint of what American power should be like projected across the world. And we will pay for this, I believe, for years and years to come.
Do you think the United States is safer now, or ironically less safe now than when the war started?
Well, there's a couple answers to that
Yeah.
question. There's no easy pat. On one hand, because my expertise is on nuclear counterproliferation, so I would say because nuclear technology is so much more available, and we know that terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda and the various splinter groups loosely affiliated with Al-Qaeda, are actively seeking a nuclear capability, whether it's just a dirty bomb that will kill maybe dozens, but sow panic and havoc, or the fissile, a genuine fissile bomb that goes off anywhere in the world. So in many ways, and that's where I spend a lot of my time. I do a lot of pro bono work for an organization called Global Zero. They are dedicated toward a world without nuclear weapons, ultimately. So I can talk about that more later. But in terms of the world, are we safer as a result of the invasion of Iraq? It's a straw man to say, well, of course the world is better off without a dictator, a monster like Saddam Hussein. Of course, the world would be a lot better off without a lot of people. It doesn't mean that that's necessarily in our national security interest to go to war, to invade, conquer, and set up a colonial sort of government. And then my area of it's not I have any policy expertise or anything in Afghanistan, but there as well, in Pakistan, with the drone attacks that have been increasing, certainly under Obama, I gotta hope that someone's sitting at a big conference table like this and going, we really are doing a good job of denigrating active terrorists that are seeking harm to the United States and our citizens. At the same time, so tactically, it's working well. At the same time, because there is so much, I love this term, collateral damage, which means, children and women are killed and wedding parties are dismembered. The profound hatred and whatever goodwill might have existed in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 has completely evaporated. The United States has to do a lot. I think Secretary Clinton worked on this very intensely throughout her tenure of rebuilding the United States moral and political capital. She did that a lot through, I think she's logged more miles than any other Secretary of State. It's a very dangerous world. I would be hard pressed to say it's a safer world since the war in Iraq.
Now we've got a I don't want to say crazy man, but the North Korean leader before the terrorist attacks on the Boston Marathon. We have TV on in our newsroom. And North Korea dominated CNN. I don't know what CNN would do without. What they do without all this stuff. My question, what's your take on North Korea? And are they just saber-rattling, or are they...
Well, North Korea is clearly a cult masquerading as a state. Everyone has noted that there is a pattern of behavior here where they are, in a sense, like the toddlers of the international system who say they're going to hold their breath and turn blue until they get what they want. And guess what? It happens. It works. We concede, they get more food, they get more aid, they get more energy, and yet they continue on their really aberrant behavior. For the first time, I'm heartened to see that China, who I think is the only country with leverage, is proceeding to apply some real pressure. I got to believe there's, of course, much more behind the scenes. They have their own reasons, of course, for wanting to keep, the enfant terrible screaming over there because they don't want to see a unified democratic Korean peninsula for their own reasons. But I think even finally Chinese leaders realize they just can't continue the way this is going. There is I'm not prepared to say that they're just making noise. I think everyone in Seoul is way too placid, considering that hundreds of thousands of people would be obliterated within seconds if a nuclear attack was launched from North Korea. Having said that, they're not suicidal. They are not. Kim Jong-un recognizes that within 10 minutes of launching an attack, he would be vaporized. So they are not suicidal, and yet he is so young and so untested. He's 28 or 29, and way too much testosterone. The fact that the fact that he's so untested, his grandfather and his father, crazy as foxes as they were, did understand the limits, and he may not yet understand that. His relatively little life experience, much less international experience, I find it, deeply troubling.
A lot of students, particularly university students who are looking at careers in maybe international work, or especially like international intelligence work, sometimes get a sort of overly romanticized view of what the field entails, especially due to media and the glorified work of being a spy or being a foreign operative in different nations. So my question would be, what's a more realistic view that you have from your own personal experience to pass on to maybe university students or people at the secondary education level who are seriously considering futures or careers in intelligencing?
Whenever given the opportunity, and I'm speaking to people at the university level, I always try to encourage considering public service as a career. I think it's really important. We need the best and the brightest going in. It doesn't have to be a career in the CIA or the State Department, but there's so many different ways to weave public service into your career, whether that is the sole focus of it or not. Of course, Hollywood romanticizes, and always I think the biggest misperception, besides the fact that I don't wear sequin gowns to work, is that it's a lone wolf, particularly in the CIA. The sort of the Jason Bourne character who's out running around. Nothing could be further from the truth. It really takes a team effort. You have what you see in the movies, the ops officer, but behind them you have security people, you have people that are perhaps providing surveillance, you have the analysts, you have the targeting people who say, here's the guy you really need to go after, he's the key scientist. It is a huge team effort. Now, I did not see Zero Dark 30 because I understand the first 30 minutes are devoted to torture, which is a whole other issue. But so that alone, I did not find that in any way appealing. But I understand that the movie shows Jessica Chastain, who's very attractive, is like this soul, courageous, really persistent woman who, over a stretch of 10 years, sort of finds bin Laden. And she's a composite character, as they've said several times. But it perpetuates the myth that it's one or two people. I'm all for showing strong females in positions where they're not usually found, but it just perpetuates the myth that it's not everyone has a role to play. There's a piece of the whole puzzle that you are putting together. So I in fact, I'm writing a spy thriller, fiction. It'll come out this fall by Penguin, and surprise, my protagonist is a female ops officer. But the whole point, I didn't want to show just guns and sex, or very little of it, because that's not how you collect intelligence at all, and how really you do rely upon others it is so complicated that there's no way one person can do it alone. So that's what I would stress and always talk to students about. Think about public service as a possible career. What does that look like for you? Does that mean it doesn't have to be international? It can be going to Washington. There's so many different ways to pursue it.